Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really big topic, a sort of modern health puzzle, vaping.
Mm.
You know, when these electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS, first appeared, the story was all about harm reduction,
Right.
helping adult smokers find a less dangerous alternative to cigarettes. That was the promise, and it sounded pretty good.
It really did. A very compelling promise, but it relied on a very specific condition. And the whole thing got complicated almost immediately because these products just flooded the market without much oversight.
No real regulatory checks.
Exactly. No long-term safety data, none of the scrutiny you'd normally expect for something you inhale deep into your lungs. And that lack of, well, basic checking allowed this really dangerous idea to spread.
Which idea is that?
The confusion between less harmful and safe, people started thinking, oh, it's not as bad as smoking, so it must be okay, which is just not the same thing at all.
And that's the core issue we want to unpack today, isn't it? That difference between less harmful and actually safe. So our mission in this deep dive is to pull together the evidence, the toxicology, the pharmacology, the marketing stuff to really understand this dual threat. Where does the supposed benefit for smokers end? And where does the risk, especially for young people and non-smokers, really begin?
Yeah, let's dig into that.
Okay, first things first. The original target, adult smokers. The harm reduction idea does have some basis, in fact, according to our sources, but it's very conditional.
Extremely conditional. The benefit really only exists if, and this is the crucial if, someone completely stops smoking all combustible tobacco, like immediately and totally switches over.
Only then do they get the advantage of avoiding those thousands of chemicals from burning tobacco.
Precisely. That's the only scenario where harm reduction actually plays out as intended.
But looking at how people actually use these things, the population studies paint a different picture, right? This clean swap doesn't happen much.
It's rare, very rare. What we see overwhelmingly is dual use, people smoking cigarettes and vaping. They often think they're cutting back, maybe reducing their overall risk.
So maybe they smoke fewer cigarettes but vape in between?
Yeah, something like that. But the alarming thing is, the research shows these dual users often have a higher cardiovascular risk than people who only smoke traditional cigarettes.
Higher. Not just the same or slightly lower.
Higher. It seems the combination, maybe the constant nicotine exposure plus the unique aerosol risks, creates a sort of synergistic negative effect. It's worse for your blood vessels.
Wow, okay. So the harm reduction argument completely falls apart there. It's not a step down. It's actually be a step up in terms of certain risks.
So for dual users, yes. And then there's the whole other side of the coin. People who never smoked cigarettes in the first place.
This is the gateway effect.
Exactly. The evidence from longitudinal studies is pretty strong now. Vaping seems to be a very effective starting point for nicotine use among non-smokers, particularly young people.
How strong is that link? Like if a teen starts vaping, how likely are they to move on to cigarettes?
The estimates suggest they're about 3 times more likely to start smoking combustibles within, say, 4 to 24 months, compared to teens who don't vape.
3 times? That's significant.
It's creating a pipeline. We're essentially recruiting a new generation into nicotine addiction, possibly even smoking, using a product initially framed as a way out for existing smokers.
And the population-level cost of that gateway. The sources mentioned a number, didn't they?
Yeah.
In terms of lost life years.
They did. It's a stark calculation. Population models estimate that the group transitioning from e-cigarettes into becoming established daily smokers stands to lose, collectively, around 1.5 million years of life.
1.5 million years.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
staggering. It really highlights the scale of the unintended consequences here.
Absolutely. A public health tool failing its primary mission, but succeeding alarmingly well at initiation.
So if it's failing adults trying to quote, but hooking kids, let's look at the how. How are these devices so effective at creating dependence? The sources say they're basically engineered for it.
That's a good way to put it. Modern NDS, especially the pod systems, are incredibly efficient nicotine delivery devices. Addiction thrives on speed, how fast the drug hits the brain.
Right.
And these devices deliver nicotine rapidly, very effectively. Comparable to a cigarette, really. That speed ramps up the potential for dependence very quickly.
And then there's the chemistry, the nicotine salts. That's a specific innovation, isn't it? How does that differ from, say, the nicotine in older cigarettes?
It's a clever bit of chemical engineering designed to make vaping smoother. See, regular freebase nicotine can be quite harsh on the throat, especially at high concentrations. That harshness is a natural turnoff, a barrier.
Okay.
Nicotine salts use acids to basically neutralize that harshness. It allows users, especially new or young users, to inhale really high concentrations of nicotine without that immediate discomfort.
So it lowers the barrier to entry, making it easier to tolerate massive doses right from the start.
Precisely. Accelerates the path to dependence.
And what about people trying to avoid nicotine altogether? Using the zero-nic liquids, can they trust the labels?
Well, based on the research, often not. It's quite shocking, actually. One study found detectable levels of nicotine in over 91%, 9 out of 10 of liquids labeled as having 0 milligrams per milliliter.
91%. So people actively trying to vape without nicotine are likely still getting it.
In many cases, yes, it points to huge issues with quality control and, frankly, truth in advertising.
That's incredibly concerning, especially thinking about younger users again, whose brains are still developing.
And that neurological vulnerability is key. The brain continues maturing until about age 25. Introducing high doses of an addictive substance like nicotine during adolescence can disrupt the development of crucial areas.
Areas controlling what, exactly?
Things like attention, learning, impulse control, mood regulation. We're talking about potentially lasting changes to how their brain functions.
So long-term developmental harm, but there's also immediate danger, right? The nicotine liquid itself.
Oh, absolutely. Acute nicotine poisoning is a serious risk. The concentrated liquids are highly toxic if ingested or even absorbed through the skin.
And kids are particularly at risk.
Tragically, yes. Over 80% of the calls to U.S. poison control centers about e-cigarettes involve children under 5. They see these small, often brightly colored and flavored cartridges.
And think they're candy or juice.
Exactly. It's a significant poisoning hazard in homes where these products are accessible.
Okay, let's pivot from the nicotine itself to what people are actually inhaling. The aerosol. The big selling point is always, it's not smoke. But the sources argue it's not harmless vapor either. It has its own distinct risks.
That's absolutely critical to understand. It's not smoke, true, but the aerosol contains a whole different cocktail of potentially harmful stuff. You're swapping the known dangers of combustion for, well, a set of newer, less understood dangers from heated flavor chemicals in device parts.
Let's talk about those flavorings. Many are generally recognized as safe GRAs for food, but inhaling them is different.
Totally different. Your digestive system can handle things that your lungs absolutely cannot. When you aerosolize and inhale these GRAS food chemicals deep into the lungs, some of them become cytotoxic. They damage cells.
The classic example is popcorn lung, right? From diacetyl.
Yes, diacetyl, that buttery flavoring. When inhaled, it's strongly linked to bronchiolitis obliterans, or popcorn lung. It causes irreversible scarring and narrowing of the smallest airways, a devastating lung disease.
But there was another flavor chemical highlighted in the sources, cinnamaldehyde, the cinnamon flavor. What's the specific issue there? It sounded quite fundamental.
It's a really striking example of targeted toxicity. Cinnamaldehyde seems to directly attack the mitochondria, the energy generators inside the cells lining our airways, the bronchial epithelial cells.
Okay, and what happens when the mitochondria are damaged?
It cripples something called ciliary deep frequency. Think of your airways as having these tiny little hairs, cilia, that constantly beat in a coordinated wave.
Like a little escalator moving mucus and tracked particles up and out.
Exactly. That's the mucociliary clearance system. It's your lungs' self-cleaning mechanism, vital for removing dust, bacteria, viruses. Cinnamaldehyde essentially cuts the power to those little motors.
So inhaling that cinnamon flavor actually weakens your lungs' ability to defend themselves against infection.
Precisely. It compromises a fundamental protective mechanism. And that really drives home why you can't judge inhaled safety based on whether something is safe to eat. They need specific inhalation testing.
And it's not just the liquids. The device itself sheds material, heavy metals.
Yes. Things like nickel, copper, lead, tin, chromium, they leach from the heating coil, the wiring, other metal parts, especially as the device heats up repeatedly.
And there was something specific about when this happens most, wasn't there? Towards the end of a pod's life.
Yes, this is a really important finding about usage dynamics. Studies found that the concentration of some toxic metals, specifically chromium, copper, and lead, goes up significantly in the aerosol from the later puffs of a pre-filled pod.
So as the pod runs low, or maybe the coil gets worn?
It seems so. As the device degrades with use, the metal leaching potentially gets worse. The product could become inherently more toxic the more you use it.
And that increased metal exposure wasn't trivial, was it? There was a link to DNA damage.
That's right. Exposure to aerosol from those later puffs with the higher metal content was linked to a 30% increase in DNA damage in human bronchial cells after only 7 days.
A 30% increase in DNA damage. That really highlights how the physical device itself contributes to the risk profile.
It absolutely does. It's not just about the liquid chemistry, it's about the hardware integrity too.
Okay, so we've got addiction, developmental issues, compromised lung defense, heavy metals. What about major acute health events? There were those lung injury crises a while back.
Right. We need to distinguish between two main ones. First, there was e-volley, that stands for e-cigarette, or vaping product, use-associated lung injury.
That was the one linked to THC vapes, wasn't it?
Primarily, yes. Strongly linked to vitamin E acetate used as a cutting agent in illicit THC cartridges. It caused severe, often life-threatening lung damage. But separate from that, there's also lipoid pneumonia.
What causes that?
That's caused by inhaling the oily substances, the fatty acids sometimes found in the e-liquid base itself. When those oils get into the tiny air sacs of the lungs, they trigger inflammation.
So, two distinct types of acute lung problems. But beyond those crises, what's the main chronic health concern emerging from the research?
The big one appears to be cardiovascular damage, specifically something called endothelial dysfunction.
Endothelial dysfunction. That's damage to the lining of blood vessels.
Exactly. The endothelium is the thin layer lining all your blood vessels. It needs to be smooth and flexible. Vaping aerosol seems to cause oxidative stress and inflammation that damages this lining.
Making blood vessels stiff and sticky, basically. Setting the stage for heart disease.
That's the pathway, yes. Heart attacks, strokes. It starts with damage to the endothelium.
And importantly, this isn't just about the nicotine, is it?
Correct. Studies show this endothelial dysfunction happens even with nicotine-free vaping liquids. So components in the aerosol itself, separate from nicotine, are causing direct harm to the vascular system.
Though nicotine doesn't help, I assume.
Oh, definitely not. Nicotine itself causes temporary increases in blood pressure and arterial stiffness, similar to smoking a cigarette. It compounds the damage.
And just to hammer this point home again, the dual users, vaping and smoking.
They consistently show the highest risk markers for cardiovascular problems, the worst of both worlds, it seems.
It all paints a pretty bleak picture, yet vaping remains popular, especially among young people. Why the disconnect? Is it just marketing?
Marketing plays a huge role, feeding into what the sources call a profound false sense of security.
How so?
Well, because there's no smoke, no tar, it looks cleaner, safer. Adolescents in particular perceive it as much less dangerous than smoking. One study found their perceived threat from vaping was about 34% lower compared to non-vapers.
And the flavors must play into that perception.
Massively. Fruit flavors, candy flavors. They make it seem benign, appealing. Data shows youth are over 6 times more likely to want to try fruit flavors. And it's not just about taste.
What else?
Things like cooling agents, menthol, or the compounds that make flavors iced are used strategically. They mask the harshness of the high nicotine concentrations delivered by nicotine salts.
Ah, connecting back to the nicotine salts. The cooling makes the high dose easier to take.
Exactly. It's a deliberate tactic to make addictive products more palatable for inexperienced users, accelerating dependence.
And this messaging is everywhere, especially online.
Ubiquitous. Social media influencers, celebrity endorsements, it all works to normalize vaping, make it look cool, harmless. The reach is incredible. Something like 7 out of 10 middle and high school students in the U.S. report seeing e-cigarette marketing.
7 out of 10. Okay. So let's try and synthesize this for everyone listening. The original harm reduction idea for adult smokers, it's collapsed, hasn't it?
Pretty much. The benefit is so conditional, requiring complete, immediate switching away from cigarettes that in reality, it rarely works out. Dual use often leads to higher risk.
Well, for non-smokers, especially young people.
It's introducing serious risks where none existed before. Immediate risks like endothelial damage, DNA damage from metals, impaired lung defenses, plus the long-term risks of addiction and potential developmental harm.
Given all this, the sources seem to argue that treating these like regular consumer products is just wrong.
Completely inadequate, yes. The scientific consensus is leaning towards much stricter regulation, things like comprehensive flavor bans based on actual inhalation toxicity, not just whether it's safe to eat.
And what about their status overall, if they are meant for quitting smoking?
The World Health Organization's stance is quite clear. If they have a therapeutic purpose, they should be regulated as medicines, available under clinical supervision, perhaps by prescription. not just sold over the counter or online like candy.
Regulated as medicines, not consumer goods. That shift alone tells you a lot about the perceived risk profile now.
It does. The evidence suggests the public health harm from youth uptake is just vastly outweighing any potential conditional benefit for existing smokers.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We heard that the devices themselves degrade, that the metal exposure increases in later puffs, making the product potentially more toxic over its lifespan.
Right, the physical integrity matters.
So, if the product inherently becomes more dangerous, the closer it gets to breaking down or running out. How should we think about responsibility? Should manufacturers or regulators be accountable for that physical degradation, for the device basically becoming more toxic with use?
It raises big questions, doesn't it? About product life cycles, maybe mandatory replacements or built-in safety cutoffs, liability issues too.
Definitely something to mull over. How do you regulate a product that gets riskier the more you use it? We'll leave you with that question. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.